Imagine a man so cold, so ruthless that even the mafia feared him. He wasn't a boss. He wasn't a soldier. He was something else, something far more terrifying. One man alone, over 200 people killed, and yet he lived a normal life, a loving husband, a father, a neighbor. No one suspected a thing. They called him the Iceman. But behind the calm face was a monster whose story is stranger than fiction. Tonight, you're about to discover how one man became the deadliest mafia hitman in history. The man who killed without mercy, without reason, and without leaving a trace. This is the story of the most dangerous mafia hitman who killed over 200 people. Richard Kuklinski was born in Jersey City, 1935, into a household where violence and fear were the rules of the day. His father was a cruel alcoholic who punished him mercilessly, and his mother offered no protection, often participating in the beatings herself. From a very young age, Kuklinski learned that the world was unpredictable, harsh, and unfair, and that the only way to survive was through control. He became obsessed with mastering his environment, experimenting on animals in ways that horrified those around him. These acts were not mere curiosity. They were early attempts to assert dominance, to understand the power he could wield over life and death. It was in this chaotic environment that the first seeds of a cold-blooded killer were sown. As a teenager, Kuklinski's fascination with control and power escalated. The first human he killed was a neighborhood bully who had tormented him for years. One night, the boy simply vanished. No one knew what had happened, and no one suspected Kuklinski. That first act of murder was not motivated solely by revenge. It was about power, the ability to decide who lived and who died. He experienced a dark thrill, a sense of absolute control over life that was addictive. It was a moment that would shape the rest of his existence and foreshadow the horrors to come. By his early 20s, Kuklinski had immersed himself in the violent world of street gangs in New Jersey. His reputation for cold calculation and calmness under pressure spread quickly. Unlike other young criminals, he never acted impulsively or out of emotion. He was patient, deliberate, and terrifyingly methodical. This combination of fearlessness and composure did not go unnoticed. Roy DeMeo, a notorious member of the Gambino crime family, saw potential in Kuklinski. DeMeo, whose crew was responsible for numerous brutal murders, recognized the value of a man who could kill without hesitation or remorse. Kuklinski's first professional contract was simple in instruction but horrifying in execution. He was ordered to eliminate a man who had been stealing money from the family's operations. Kuklinski carried out the hit flawlessly, leaving no evidence, no witnesses, and no trace that could be followed back to him. It was a demonstration of skill and efficiency that would become his trademark. This act earned him the trust of the mafia, but it also marked the beginning of a career that would span decades and claim hundreds of lives. What set Kuklinski apart from other killers was his complete detachment from emotion. While other hitmen might hesitate or question orders, he approached every assignment with the same cold, analytical precision. Murder was not personal for him. It was a business transaction, a task to be completed efficiently and without error. He quickly learned to manipulate and exploit the weaknesses of those around him, using fear, intimidation, and his reputation to maintain control. Friends, family, and even employers could become expendable if they posed a threat or failed to meet his expectations. As his notoriety grew, Kuklinski developed increasingly sophisticated methods of murder. He would use knives, guns, cyanide, and even industrial freezers to conceal the time of death. The freezing of his victims, in particular, earned him the chilling nickname the Iceman. It was not just a tactic, it was a psychological weapon, instilling fear in both his employers and his rivals. The idea that he could kill someone and freeze their body to evade detection added an almost mythical quality to his legend, making him one of the most feared men in organized crime. By the end of his first decade working for the Mafia, Kuklinski had transformed from an abused child into a professional killer whose name inspired terror. He was meticulous, patient, and utterly remorseless, traits that made him almost impossible to track or predict. Each murder he committed further honed his skills and reinforced his reputation. He became a man who could navigate the most violent circles of organized crime with ease, yet he did so silently, without drawing attention to himself. Richard Kuklinski's early life, shaped by abuse, neglect, and an early fascination with death, created a man who would become the deadliest mafia hitman in American history, from experimenting on animals as a child to his first murder as a teenager, and eventually to executing professional hits for multiple crime families. Every step of his life built toward a chilling mastery of violence. His story serves as a stark reminder of how trauma, skill, and opportunity can combine to produce a man capable of unspeakable horrors, and yet, for years, remain invisible to the world around him. Richard Kuklinski quickly became the Mafia's most feared secret weapon. Unlike other killers, he worked for multiple families at the same time, including the Gambino, Genovese, and De Cavalcante families, earning money from each while betraying none, or at least leaving no evidence of betrayal. His efficiency and discretion were unmatched. He used whatever method suited the job: knives, guns, chains, cyanide, or even more unconventional tools. No target was too difficult, and no location too exposed. He adapted perfectly to every situation, making him invisible to law enforcement and untraceable in the criminal world. What made Kuklinski terrifying wasn't just his skill, but his methodical approach. He planned every murder down to the smallest detail, ensuring no mistakes. He would study his victims, understand their routines, and choose the most efficient way to strike. He became a ghost among shadows, someone who could vanish into thin air after committing acts that would make even hardened mobsters shiver. His clients trusted him implicitly, knowing that hiring Kuklinski was a guarantee of success, but also a potential risk to their own safety. One of his most infamous techniques was freezing his victims after murder. Industrial freezers became his signature method to obscure the time of death and confuse investigators. This earned him the nickname the Iceman, a name whispered with fear in mafia circles and among law enforcement. The freezing method also reflected Kuklinski's cold, calculated nature. He was not just killing people. He was manipulating every element of the crime to ensure complete control. He removed unpredictability from his work, and in doing so, he became almost untouchable. Kuklinski treated murder purely as a business. Each contract had a price, ranging from $20,000 to $50,000 per hit, depending on difficulty. The Mafia knew him as a professional, someone who would follow orders to the letter, who would never hesitate, and who never left witnesses. But his loyalty was only to himself. While he executed assignments for mob bosses, he was feared even by those who hired him. He had no allegiance beyond money, and anyone who crossed him, even slightly, risked disappearing. He was also a master at psychological warfare. Kuklinski could intimidate with silence, with his calm demeanor, or with subtle threats that made people question whether he could truly be stopped. Rumors about him spread faster than his actual crimes. Mobsters whispered about his efficiency and ruthlessness. Law enforcement struggled to track him because he left no trail. Even those who suspected him never had the evidence to charge him. Kuklinski had perfected the art of remaining unseen, like a shadow in the night. Despite his violent life, Kuklinski maintained an ordinary appearance that kept him invisible in plain sight. He lived as a suburban husband and father, driving a car, mowing a lawn, attending church, and smiling at neighbors. This duality, the monster hiding in a seemingly ordinary man, made him unpredictable and even more dangerous. He could walk into a family barbecue and then disappear to carry out a hit with the same cold detachment. This compartmentalization was not accidental. It was a calculated strategy that ensured his survival for decades. Kuklinski's career in the Mafia was marked by extreme efficiency, adaptability, and fearlessness. He was never reckless, never emotional, and never sentimental. Each victim was simply a task, each contract a job to be completed without error. He took pride in his skill and control, and this pride drove him to perfect new methods of murder and concealment. Over the years, his reputation grew, and the stories about him became legendary, a man who could kill anyone, anywhere, and remain unseen. By the mid-1980s, Kuklinski had become a ghostly figure in the world of organized crime. His meticulous planning, professional execution, and cold detachment made him the Mafia's ultimate hitman, someone whose name alone inspired fear. He was a man whose life was defined not by loyalty, love, or morality, but by precision, calculation, and an obsession with control. In the shadows of New Jersey's crime families, Richard Kuklinski operated as a perfect predator, leaving hundreds of victims in his wake and few clues for those who would later try to catch him. By day, Richard Kuklinski presented himself as the perfect suburban father and husband. In Dumont, New Jersey, he lived in a modest home with a white picket fence, blending seamlessly into a quiet neighborhood where everyone knew each other. To neighbors, he was polite, helpful, and ordinary, the kind of man you would trust without hesitation. He attended church regularly, hosted family barbecues, and participated in community events. His children saw him as a loving father who helped with homework, played games, and read bedtime stories. No one could have imagined that beneath this calm exterior lurked a man capable of unspeakable violence, a killer whose hands had taken over 200 lives. Kuklinski carefully compartmentalized his life, ensuring that his family never glimpsed the darkness he carried. To them, he was Richard the husband, Richard the father, the dependable man who went to work each day. But in reality, he was traveling across the state, executing hits for multiple mafia families with ruthless efficiency. He returned home with blood on his shoes or money from his kills hidden in briefcases, and yet no one suspected a thing. This dual existence, so perfectly maintained, allowed him to operate with near total freedom for decades. The psychological complexity of Kuklinski's double life was staggering. On one hand, he could be tender, patient, and charming. On the other, he could commit murder with clinical precision. This ability to separate the ordinary from the extraordinary made him nearly untouchable. His calmness, his discipline, and his absolute control over his emotions were his greatest weapons. Even the Mafia, accustomed to violence, regarded him with unease. He could kill anyone, anywhere, and still return home for dinner without betraying the slightest hint of what he had done. Kuklinski's children remained oblivious to his true nature for years. His wife, Barbara, believed he was a successful businessman involved in film distribution. She never questioned the cash he brought home or the long hours he worked. In her eyes, Richard was the provider, the dependable husband, the man she had married. This ignorance was no accident. It was Kuklinski's careful strategy to maintain control over every part of his life. By keeping his criminal activities completely separate from his domestic life, he ensured his freedom and the longevity of his career. His ability to live a normal life while committing extraordinary violence is part of what made Kuklinski so terrifying. He understood that appearance was everything. A man who looks ordinary can hide extraordinary evil. He could walk into a classroom, a grocery store, or a neighborhood gathering without raising suspicion, all while knowing that at any moment he could end a life without leaving evidence. The contrast between his domestic life and his criminal life amplified the fear surrounding him. People could not imagine that someone so ordinary could be capable of such extraordinary cruelty. Kuklinski's methods in his professional life were just as precise as his ability to blend into suburban normalcy. He used whatever means were necessary to complete a contract, whether it was shooting, stabbing, poisoning, or freezing his victims to confuse investigators. Each murder was meticulously planned, executed with cold efficiency, and then erased. His dual life was a testament to his genius at manipulation, strategy, and discipline. While others in organized crime were reckless, impulsive, or emotional, Kuklinski remained detached, calculating, and in control at all times. The psychological toll of living two lives did not seem to affect him, at least outwardly. His calm demeanor, even when discussing murders, made law enforcement and psychologists alike shiver. He displayed no guilt, no remorse, and no fear of discovery. In his mind, the domestic and criminal worlds were entirely separate, and as long as he maintained this boundary, he would remain untouchable. This compartmentalization, combined with his lethal skill set, allowed Kuklinski to operate for decades without being caught. He became a ghost among the living, a man whose ordinary appearance masked one of the deadliest criminals in American history. His story challenges every assumption about what a killer looks like, revealing the terrifying truth that the most dangerous monsters are often hidden in plain sight. In the quiet streets of Dumont, the Iceman walked unnoticed, taking lives by night and playing the perfect father by day, leaving a trail of fear and mystery that would puzzle law enforcement for years to come. By the mid-1980s, whispers about Richard Kuklinski had begun to reach law enforcement, but proving anything was nearly impossible. He had been operating for decades, and the sheer efficiency and secrecy of his killings left almost no trace. Victims vanished without evidence, and no one could connect him directly to the murders. Detectives had descriptions, rumors, and patterns, but they needed a breakthrough, a way to get close enough to catch the man who had become the most feared hitman in organized crime. To capture him, the FBI launched an unprecedented operation known as Operation Iceman. The plan was to use an undercover agent to infiltrate Kuklinski's world. Agent Dominic Polifrone posed as a hitman seeking cyanide for a contract killing Kuklinski, who trusted very few people, was cautious at first. But Polifrone played his role perfectly, gradually earning Kuklinski's confidence over several months. During this time, Kuklinski would brag about his past killings, explain his methods, and offer advice on disposing of bodies. These conversations were being meticulously recorded by the FBI, giving law enforcement the evidence they had long sought. Kuklinski's meticulous nature was evident even in these undercover meetings. He spoke calmly, almost like he was describing mundane business transactions rather than murders. He outlined how he used industrial freezers to confuse investigators, how he would poison a drink to eliminate someone silently, and how he could plan a hit in a way that left no connection back to him. His pride in these methods was chilling. He wasn't remorseful or frightened. He was teaching, demonstrating, and sharing his craft as if it were a skill to be admired. When the FBI finally moved to arrest him in December 1986, they had gathered enough evidence to ensure success. Kuklinski was apprehended with weapons and cyanide in his car, confirming his role as a professional contract killer. During questioning, he remained unnervingly calm. When asked how many people he had killed, he replied with an almost indifferent tone, "Dozens, maybe 100, maybe more, I don't remember." It was the kind of answer that made seasoned investigators shiver, a man who could casually speak about murder without emotion. After his arrest, Kuklinski gave detailed interviews, revealing the full extent of his crimes. He admitted to over 200 murders, although some authorities believed this might be an exaggeration. Even if the exact number is debated, there is no doubt that he was responsible for a staggering amount of violence. Law enforcement could verify at least 100 killings, and the evidence suggested many more. Each confession highlighted not just his skill, but the terrifying detachment with which he operated. Kuklinski's fall also exposed the extraordinary planning and patience that had kept him free for so long. He was never reckless. He carefully avoided suspicion, trusted almost no one, and always had a contingency plan. His ability to blend into suburban life, maintain a loving family persona, and still commit hundreds of murders demonstrated a level of criminal ingenuity rarely seen. Even the most experienced mafia members who employed him recognized his genius and his danger. Psychologists who studied him later described Kuklinski as a textbook sociopath, emotionally detached, highly intelligent, and able to manipulate people effortlessly. Yet, Kuklinski himself had a different perspective. He viewed his life of murder as a product of circumstance, shaped by childhood abuse and neglect. In his mind, he had simply adapted to survive, turning his trauma into an unstoppable skill set. The arrest of Richard Kuklinski marked the end of one of the most chilling careers in American crime history. The man known as the Iceman had finally been caught, but his legend only grew. He had evaded capture for decades, killed hundreds, and terrified both law enforcement and organized crime alike. His methods, his calm demeanor, and his ability to live a double life left an indelible mark on true crime history. Kuklinski's story during these final years of freedom serves as a stark reminder of how a man can manipulate perception, evade justice, and operate in plain sight. Even when surrounded by suspicion, his patience, calculation, and meticulous planning allowed him to remain untouchable until law enforcement finally found the key to unlock the truth. After his arrest, Richard Kuklinski entered a world he could no longer control. Yet even in prison, his story continued to shock and fascinate. Behind bars, he finally began to speak more openly about the hundreds of murders he had committed, revealing a chilling level of detail about his methods. He described using cyanide, guns, knives, and even rats to kill his victims, explaining the processes with the calm precision of someone discussing a technical manual rather than acts of murder. Psychologists who interviewed him described him as a textbook sociopath, emotionally detached, highly intelligent, and utterly unrepentant. Yet Kuklinski saw himself differently. He claimed that he was shaped by circumstance, molded by abuse, neglect, and violence into the perfect predator. In his mind, he was simply a product of the world he had been forced to navigate, a man who had learned to survive by mastering death. Prison gave Kuklinski a platform to tell his story, and he did so with unnerving calm. In interviews, he spoke of the murders as though they were business transactions, often detailing the logistics with a detached, almost clinical precision. He recounted how he would plan each hit meticulously, choosing the right weapon, the right moment, and the right method to leave no evidence. He described freezing victims to mask the time of death, poisoning drinks to kill silently, and luring targets into traps they could never escape. To Kuklinski, murder was not an act of passion or revenge. It was an art form, a skill that he had perfected over decades. Despite the horror of his crimes, Kuklinski maintained that he loved his family and that his domestic life had been entirely separate from his criminal activities. He continued to defend the duality of his existence, insisting that his wife and children had been completely unaware of the darkness behind the suburban facade. This ability to compartmentalize, to live two entirely separate lives, was a hallmark of his character and one of the reasons he had evaded capture for so long. It also made him fascinating to psychologists, criminologists, and the public alike. Kuklinski's confessions and interviews became legendary in the true crime community. They offered a rare window into the mind of a man who had killed hundreds without remorse, a man who had walked among society undetected for decades. His calm descriptions of murder, his pride in his methods, and his unapologetic demeanor created a figure who was terrifying, yet oddly compelling. People struggled to reconcile the image of a suburban father with that of a cold-blooded killer capable of erasing lives with efficiency and precision. During his time in prison, Kuklinski reflected on his life with a level of honesty that many found disturbing. He admitted that his childhood abuse had shaped him, that the violence he had witnessed and endured had taught him that survival required mastery of fear and death. He claimed that he had no choice but to become what he was, a man capable of extraordinary violence, operating with meticulous precision. For Kuklinski, the murders were less about hatred or malice, and more about control, a way to impose order on a world that had once been chaotic and cruel. In 2006, Richard Kuklinski died in prison at the age of 70. He had spent nearly 2 decades behind bars, yet even in death, the legend of the Iceman persisted. He requested that he not be resuscitated if he went into cardiac arrest, a final act of control that reflected the precision and meticulousness that had defined his entire life. His passing marked the end of one of the most chilling chapters in American crime history, but his story continues to captivate audiences around the world. Kuklinski's life and crimes challenge everything people believe about human nature. He was a man who killed hundreds, loved his family, and lived among ordinary people without detection for decades. He was feared by criminals and law enforcement alike, respected for his skill, and reviled for his brutality. His legacy remains a dark reminder of the extremes of human behavior, a tale of how trauma, skill, and ruthlessness can combine to create a figure who is both horrifying and unforgettable. The Iceman's story is a chilling testament to the darkest possibilities of the human mind, a true crime tale that will continue to haunt and fascinate for generations to come.